And we are live. It's the Studio Synergy 8, where a bunch of creative artists get together, working on their projects, or simply sketching, and talk about business, comics, art, movies, or just anything that pops into our minds. You're welcome to join future hangouts. This is all done on G Plus and is recorded and posted up onto YouTube. And today we have two friendly folks with us. We have Jeremy.
Hi, y'all.
Introduce yourself. Tell us a little about what you're up to.
My name is Jeremy Burley. My website is optichouse.com. I have a bunch of comics that I have self-published, a graphic novel I put out a couple years ago. It's a psychological thriller called Eye of the Gods. I'm currently working on a book called Morning Star. It's an 8-issue series that's telling Lucifer's fall from heaven as a Western. I am the artist and writer. And I'm working on a page right now.
Cool. Yeah, I guess first saw you on YouTube, I guess, and followed you on other places, and I really like your work, and you've been busy at this for a long time and doing great work.
Well, the kind words you had to say online meant a lot to me. Just the fact of, an experienced, talented inker giving encouragement to somebody who, like, the book I'm working on now, this is the first time I've ever tried inking with a brush, and I've generally never been that happy with my inking. In fact, another friend of mine who's a comic professional, he looked at my work and he said that the thing is, I pencil with a feather and I ink with a chainsaw. So yeah, I tend to have sort of a rough, pretty loose style, but I'm slowly finding ways to get the brush to work with me and become a little bit more fluid as I go. But I enjoy the fact that there's bumps in the road and there's always new things to learn and things that I haven't mastered, because it means I'm not going to get bored. I mean, if I knew how to do everything, I think I would be I would look for new challenges or something different to do. The fact that making comics is so hard is probably what draws me to it, because I'm never ever going to get bored. I'm never going to know everything about the visual part. I'm never going to know everything about the writing part. I still feel like I have to work on my draftsmanship a lot, my composition, my anatomy, proportion, the dialogue side, pacing, and plotting. There's so many balls to juggle, and it's difficult, but that difficulty is what engages me. So,
yeah, there's always a ton of challenges that you face with each page, each book, and promotion is a whole different thing about it. So yeah, it's a real business. So we also have with us today Clayton. Hey, Clayton.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to.
I'm Clayton Van Loon. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm an illustration student. I got like 2 more semesters to go for my associates, so I'm pretty stoked about that. But yeah, I'm working on my first comic book. I don't really have a name for it yet. I got the first draft of the script done, and I've been kind of sort of storyboarding it out from there. Today I'm going to work on just like a mock finished piece, because I'm not quite sure like what the scale I'm going to draw the finished comic at, because I'm probably going to print it out at like Kinko's or something. So I kind of want to do a test piece to kind of see how it might print, like the print might look, and then kind of figure out what my scale would be after that. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I like what I've seen so far. You really you are a good illustrator, and I look forward to seeing how you put it together and what it comes out looking like, all wrapped up in a bow.
Thanks, man. Yeah. Of course, probably in like a lot of people's minds, when you have an idea that you really, really like it's so amazing up there, like in your head.
Yeah.
And I'm quickly learning that it's tough to get that down, even in these early stages.
Yeah, you guys were talking a little before the broadcast started, and that's definitely a factor. I know for even all the time I've been in the industry, it's you do the best you can, and you gotta eventually finish a project and move on. I try to make 1 or 2%, increase of ability, but to go for everything at once, really, like, unless you're putting years into one project, you gotta eventually give it up and move on.
Yeah, there is.
But it's a difficult thing to really like get the vision that's in your head and put that out onto paper. I've been an inker most of my career, and now doing my webcomics, and it's like, yeah, what I had in mind isn't anything that's ending up on paper, but it is telling the story. It's hopefully readable to other people other than myself. Yeah, I'm just trying to get things right and move on for each page, as I get on out. So.
Yeah, I'm just stoked to be here. I'm gonna kind of just soak it in. Peter, I really like your stuff. What was that website earlier? It's optichouse.com?
Yeah, it's optichouse, all one word, .com.
Cool, I gotta check that out.
Oh,
yeah, this page looks awesome. Yeah.
So, Jeremy, you were mentioning inking and whatnot. What kind of paper are you using?
I'm using the I think it's the Canson comic book artboards that are pre-printed.
Okay.
And I ended up I take my layouts and I blow them up, blue line them, and print them out. So I kind of skip over penciling, and I go from rough layouts to inks, because I found that process of light boxing and blowing up my layouts and light boxing them to the board and penciling them, I would always lose a little something in the translation from the layout to the finished pencils. And then I would flip those pages on the light box and tighten them up and clean them up. And I felt like I would always, in that process, by the time I finished cleaning them up and then inking them again, it was like I was doing the same work over multiple times. But instead of it getting better with each pass, they're getting a little bit worse with each pass. And I thought, let me just cut straight from the part that has the energy that I want to trying to make a finished line that's is interesting and has like the nice composition and the tones and the line weights. So.
Well, it's looking good, from what I can tell on screen. It's a little harder, but
I can see if I can lower this a little bit closer to the camera a little bit closer to the artboard, so you can see a little bit more. Because I have it kind of raised up to see a lot of the page, but I can probably pull it in a little bit closer.
Whatever is more comfortable for you. There's always going to be a difference from looking at something on camera than seeing like a scan of a page.
Yeah, that's true.
So, this is a relaxed show. Then don't worry about it. So, what kind of ink do you use?
Let's see. I'm using that's a good question. The bottle is an old Higgins Black Magic that I've just been reusing. But
Right.
I've been refilling it with Speedball, and let me actually grab the bottle real quick, because I'm not sure which brand off the top of my head. I've just been using this same bottle for the past couple of years. Oh yeah, it's some Super Black Speedball Super Black India ink.
Okay.
And for the most part, it gives me a nice balance in terms of how black it is and how well it flows. But I find that usually to get it to run just the right level, I have to add like just 1 drop of water. And I know that there's some people who leave their bottles of ink out for a certain amount of time to get the whole bottle at the right amount of humidity and mixture. And I'm like, I will end up ruining and just going through bottles of ink if I do that. So I'll just put out the same amount of drops. Like I put like 5 drops in a little bottle cap next to me, and then I've got where it's about 5 to 8 drops of ink for 1 drop of water. And that's usually enough to ink like 1 or 2 panels, and then I'll add a little bit more and refresh it and just kind of try and find that balance where it's not, if it starts to thicken up on me, that's fine if I'm covering a large area of black, but otherwise I'm like, yeah, I gotta get it so it's not too watery and the lines don't get and the lines don't stay rich and don't have a strong black look to them versus that chunky paint thing where it's dark but it's a big thick smear.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to get used to finding just that right little chemistry with the inks.
Yeah, it's I call it what should I call it? It's a bit of alchemistry. Like I typically, most of my career, what I would do is leave the bottles open. But I have cats now, and that's just impossible because I'm always scared that that's the first thing that. So it's like I can't leave them anywhere in this place. So I just leave it open while I'm working. But I guess I'm using Black Magic now. I prefer an ink called Pelican, which isn't as easily found, but you can still find it around. It's a Pelican with a K, and it gives me a nice dark black, but it's flat. It's instead of slick and shiny, it's flat and has sort of a real just printed look once you're done inking, which I prefer myself. And but Higgins is almost just as good. I find that I have to leave the bottle open more to evaporate the water content, ink ratio. But if I have to go over my inks a couple of times, I don't mind, because a finished page, I do prefer it to look as good as as if it was printed. And there's plenty of artists that just like sort of slap down inks, and it's all like dark patches of black and lighter patches of gray, but you can scan it and darken it, and so it can all look jet black. Like Mike Mignola is a perfect example. Like I've seen some of his original pages, and man, it looks like he almost didn't care, but you look like at a Hellboy comic, and it's like just like it's bright white and jet black, so it's like it could work.
He's as much black he would be if he was trying to make it look like the way the printed one is. He'd go through like half a bottle of each page.
It is true, yes. But that's just my particular way of doing things. Like I'm very detail oriented, and eventually, if my pages sell down the line, or if they don't, I mean, it's something I just do. It's my thing. So what else can I talk about inking? Like, well, I mostly use Winsor & Newton brushes. There are a couple of other good ones, but I use number 1, number 2, number 3, depending. I just got a number 2 at the moment. And I use the quill. I use a Hunt 102 quill, which is great for really, you know, fill and edges into my work. Um, it's better for like a lot of smaller detail. You know, you can do a lot of little faces and hands and uh, architecture depending on your style and approach. I also use rapidiographs for the more technical stuff. Like if I'm doing cityscapes or cars or whatever, I can get really just straight flat lines using the rapidiographs. Sometimes I like to go natural, and I'll do things either with a quill or a brush, like buildings and homes in the backgrounds and whatnot. But sometimes I feel like it just needs a perfect linear look, and I'll use the rapidiographs.
Yeah, that's one of the things when I first started this book, I kind of wanted to, because it's a Western, and to have everything look a little bit more, I guess, rustic and have that warped wood feel to it and kind of old-timey. I considered inking all of the backgrounds with the brush as opposed to pen, but I still don't feel like I still feel like I'm developing the muscle memory and the motor control to really, have a lot of control over my brush inking. So
Right.
at a certain point, it was like, this just together, and I went back to backgrounds with microns, only because
Okay.
the problem I have is that with the rapidiographs is that I wouldn't use them. If you're using them on a weekly basis and you're breaking them out all the time, it's fine because you use them, you go through the ink, and then you flush them out and you refill them. But if you only break them out like once a month, which at this
Mhm.
point I probably would use them on a daily basis, but there was a period where I wasn't using them that often, so every time I did them, it was that whole thing of where you're spending 20 minutes, like trying to run alcohol through them and get them cleaned out so they're running again. And I got to the point with the microns, I was like, I'd rather just. I like the convenience of I can just pop them open and still get a nice clean line with them. I think I still have a couple of rapidiographs laying around somewhere, but I haven't broken them out in a while.
Well, sadly, I've used these for years. What's it called? Retro? Not retro. Rot ring, something like that.
I know what you're
Uh,
talking about, the brown ones.
the brown ones,
Mhm.
and they have ink cartridges, but unfortunately, um, let's see, the ink cartridges are less available and higher priced now.
Mm.
Um, I think, I've been actually the last couple of times just filling them up with ink myself. There's, ink specifically for refilling it.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, now I run into the problem of, it's like it's not coming out as smooth. It's overflowing within the tip. It's a pain in the ass to refill, and I'm not as happy with them lately. Um,
You want to be able to just run and gun, just get in and do the work.
yeah. It's like I love the ink cartridges, and I never had a problem using them. But it's just, it's a lot harder to find, and even online, and they're just too high priced for, the short period of using just one cartridges in some of them. It's too expensive.
Mm. When you were refilling the cartridges, were you using a one of those larger pointed syringes?
Well, the ink bottles, I'll grab one. Yeah, let's see. Have, you know, just the point you pour
Mm-hmm.
into the cartridge to refill it.
Okay.
So, um, but it's like, I don't know, you can't see what's going into the cartridge as you fill it. So there's always, it's like either you're not filling it in enough or there's going to be overflow. And more cases than not, there's overflow. Um, and yeah, it's just messier, and I'm against using markers, so I don't know. I'm just going to have to put up with this, I guess.
I have a bad habit of always like. I mean, it's good to experiment and find new tools, but I know a few artists that have kind of said, well, if I change my process every like 6 months to a year, then I fall in that habit where I'm never really mastering a certain technique. Because sometimes you need that mastery where you're like, okay, I've got this down, I have it on lock, I know how to make it look the way I want, I can get the lines to do the way I want. Whereas if you're constantly playing with new tools, you're constantly battling a learning curve. And I still feel like I haven't learned how to draw so well that the learning curve itself isn't really that much of a problem for me, because I definitely feel like there's pages I'm working on and I'm like, I'm just drawing something that I'm not good at drawing. For instance, I'm not great at animals, and I thought, well, great, I'm doing a Western. This will be a chance for me to practice drawing horses. And I kind of feel like, for instance, a lot of people struggle with vehicles, so I'm thinking about wanting to do a comic that's maybe like an entire car chase. Just as, like, my whole thing is if there's something I'm bad at, I try to give myself exercises to work on that. And there's a lot of things that fall into that category.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I feel like when it comes to inking, I've mastered it. When it comes to inking myself, that's a long road ahead of me, because I'm too loose a penciler, and even though I've worked on plenty of pencilers who are loose, but somehow approaching my own pencils to ink is a sort of majorly different equation. And I'm not as tight penciling. I'm not as tight inking over my own pencils. But I'm also trying to do like a webcomic and trying to be in a state of mind where it's not what I used to do. I'm not trying to perfect each page. I'm trying to do each page on a schedule. So trying to sort of keep a time limit on each one, and so I'm not going to be the perfectionist who goes over the page 3 or 4 times and tightens up everything and makes all the blacks solid black, and it's like I'm a lot looser, and eventually I'll work towards that, but right now I'm just like, hey, I've only done 6 or 7 pages. I'm not going to sweat it at this point. I'm just going to move forward and get more pages done and improve as I go. But, it's going to be a big curve before I make any kind of serious progress. So I'm not sweating it too much.
What do you think? Go ahead.
When you're inking your own drawings, does that affect the way that you draw? Just because you have the inks in mind, like right off the bat?
It does. But then, I haven't really penciled for somebody else to ink. But it's okay. Let me put it this way: like, if I'm just penciling and maybe penciling like a commission or a pinup or whatever, it's different than penciling a comic page for me. And I could be much tighter, like doing a pinup and then inking over it. But even then, I'm not, even if the pencils are tight, I know there's still that room for me to go in and sort of experiment with the lines I put down and add to it or take away or whatever the case may be. But inking comic pages is it's different. It's hopefully I'm adding a lot more to the pencils I put down because so far it's been a lot more to be desired. But like I said, I'm trying to just keep a state of mind of, like there's millions of artists that inspire me, like Jack Kirby, who he's inked himself, but he's also worked with inkers, and he's slapped pages left and right, and like John Romita Jr. is a big favorite of mine, and I've seen his pencils, and man, 1,000 different inkers could ink him in 1,000 different ways because he leaves a lot for interpretation. And there's a lot of artists like that, and I guess that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah.
I've done a little bit of inking of other artists, and I found that for me, it's almost like because it wasn't somebody whose work, it was like other independent creators. Whereas if there's somebody who you've seen inked by other artists, you can kind of say, all right, I see what works well in my opinion, and then it's actually communicating with the artist and asking them, okay, who do you like? Who do you like in terms of their inks on top of yours? What things have you not liked? Haven't worked. So you can have that back and forth. But a lot of times, the limited experience I've had of inking other artists' work, they were kind of in the same boat that I've been, where they still feel like they're building their own vocabulary and their own language. They're kind of finding themselves. And so it's sort of like, they're like, hey, just add some depth to it. Give me some line weights. But I'm like, all right, let's see what we can make happen here. And I felt like the challenge was not being able to see into that artist's head and see what they envision. Because I feel like that's kind of the thing it's like being if one person's a visual director, then you're kind of like being the camera operator. Like you're like, I'm trying to facilitate your vision, even though I'm the one who's operating the lenses and I'm deciding the lighting. It's like what I'm putting down is going to have just as much of an effect on the final look, if not more, than what you're putting down. But my goal is to capture the vision that's in your head, and that I feel like that's one of those things that I imagine only comes with time and experience, and if you're fortunate, building a working relationship with a certain penciler.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be your experience, Peter?
Yeah, when working over anyone's pencils, I try to get in touch with them. It wasn't so easy back in the day, but it was always something it's like I asked the editor, the publisher, can I get their number? Is it, ask them if it's all right. I wish to talk to them, at least have a conversation before I start inking over somebody's pencils. And even though it's easier to communicate with artists nowadays via the internet, email, or instant message, or even going on Skype and talking. Some artists just they're not their style. It's like, well, here's my pencils, ink it. They don't have a clue. That they know their job. They don't know about what I do, or they just expect magic. But I always like ask what are your influences? Who do you who do you see inking your work best? Is a good one. Is it somebody like Joe Sinnott, who is very clean and smooth and rounded your corners, or is it Sienkiewicz who will dig his knife into your page and splatter all over it, or
It becomes a Sienkiewicz page when it's done.
But yeah, it's like, because I would never say like, do you want me? Because I feel like I've been very fluid in my approach over different artists and even on my own work. So like, for me to say me, it's like, well, me of what piece or what what book was I working on? Um, but yeah, it's communication is absolute key. Not only in building a good working relationship, but just to really nail down the art and develop it to its maximum potential point. Um, and now given computer coloring is also a factor. If it's good to know, like if you're working for one of the big companies or even some of the small publishers where they have real a factory going, and it's good to know what the book will eventually look like. Like if the publisher tends to use computer colorists who are heavy with the work, you may not give as much detail like the page you're working on right now. You may not put all that work into it and just give more of a sort of
An open line, yeah.
outline kind of thing. Because it's like, well, on one hand, it's your wasted time because because the colorist is just like slapping on the coloring over it and hiding all the line work and skill you put into it. But it's also more of a, like a painted computer coloring style is what a lot of publishers use, and that's good for some things. But I like to see the line work personally.
Mm-hmm.
I know, like I got a creator-owned book called Retro, which is a superhero book, and the penciler I'm working with has got a very detailed style, and I really want to see that come through. And I have a colorist, but I might have to like really have long conversations with what I want to see in the final outcome, because I don't want to hide the lines at all, but I do want to show off the artwork and tell the story at the same time, and it's a difficult balance.
Oh yeah, it probably takes like a few pages of just trial and error before you get it quite to like, oh, this now looks like where everyone's humming on all cylinders. Like synergy.
Yeah.
Synergy.
Hey. Absolutely. I know that like a lot of what I miss from comics of the 70s and 80s before they got into computer coloring was the sheer boldness and iconicness of what comics used to be because of their limited palette and the limited amount of colors they could put on a page. It's actually, they used a lot of you know, straight on green, yellow, whatever the case, and it just made everything super bold. If you go to like my Facebook right now, I usually put like artist work in my covers, and there's an old Hulk cover, and it's really green. The Hulk is really green, and his pants are really purple, and it's like it looks so awesome. If that was colored now, there'd be so much different colors within that, and adding a lot of color isn't in itself a bad thing, but you do want like the characters to pop so you can read the images better, because there's a lot going on a typical comic page, and with computer coloring, it's sort of like all looks the same. You can get 20 different colorists to color the same page and not be able to tell the difference between them. It's a lot harder, I think, for a computer colorist to stand out stylistically than than an artist.
Oh yeah, well, that's the whole thing. Like, you want to have some contrast on the actual page.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I'm composing the pages, I'll set up my lighting, and it's challenging because I definitely feel like I'm learning how to properly render with light and dark. But I'll try to set the composition so that you can see that the alternating area. Sometimes I'll create patterns of dark and light to say, all right, just to separate distinct, this is one panel, this is next panel, to separate them as moments, but then also trying to think of the entire page of, well, do I want it to be an overall darker page, an overall lighter page, and if I'm going to have the one panel that's going to be like the money shot of that page, do I want to make all of the other panels darker so that panel can be light? Do I want to make all the other panels lighter so that one can be dark? And it's just like, those are all composition choices, but I think it's slightly different in my case because of the fact that I'm penciling and inking my own work, whereas if you're inking somebody else, you may look at it and say, all right, trying to work as well as you can with whatever the intent of the other artist is. But, well, that's an interesting question. How do you deal with compositional lighting with your own work? Because like you said, the challenge of you're finding different challenges in inking yourself versus inking another artist.
Yeah. Well, that's I find that challenging. I haven't mastered anything when it comes to penciling, but there are things I try to keep in mind. Although I think I'm more focused on telling a story rather than telling it to the best of my ability at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But there are things that are in my head that I stockpiled from my years of just talking with other artists and looking at their work and just things I've gathered along the way. What was it? Bollywood did, what was it, to 22 panels?
That's sitting above my drawing board right now. I can look at it.
There you go. And that's great to use. What exactly is it called, by the way?
Well, you know what? There might be some people who are either watching or may come back and watch later. There we go. And you know what's funny? Have you seen the IDW book Woodwork?
Woodwork.
It's a catalog from there's an exhibition, I think, in Spain about 2 or 3 years ago. And it's basically the museum catalog. This exhibition is a retrospective on all of Wally Wood's work. And I saw this book. It's this big, massive book. So a family member got it for me as a Christmas present one year, and I'd never gotten super deep into Wally Wood. I knew his reputation as a storyteller, and I knew there's books I'd seen here and there, some of his old Daredevil stuff, bits and pieces, but I'd never gone deep into the Wally Wood catalog. And I got that book, and I went through and I read it once just looking at the art. Then I went back through and read the actual biographical stuff and all of the things they had to say about the work and his process. And it was just that's one of those, I'm getting to that point now of trying to go back and look at the artists that influenced the artists that I grew up being fans of. And Wally Wood is one of those people whose name always kept coming up, but I never really dug deep in it. And there was so much in terms of how well he renders a scene. I could never be as clean as his work is, but it's clean and so incredibly detailed. It's like each panel is like a rich little world, but he still knows how to not overwhelm you. And it's like magic. It's like alchemy, like you said, being able to add detail without adding clutter.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes you see stuff where there's rendering and there's hatching and there's bricks and there's steel and there's wheels and guns and you just like, kind of a mess. But finding somebody that I'm probably more drawn towards artists that are, even though I'm a sloppy artist, I'm drawn more towards clean artists or artists that can add a lot of detail without making it fit in together.
Yeah. A page can be over rendered. Like close up of faces can be over rendered. But you have to pick your moments. Sometimes when a clean image can say a lot more than something you spend a whole day on. But like what that was a good representation of the Wally Wood stuff you just showed, of really just setting up your panels differently. One, because you don't want to bore the reader. Like if the reader gets bored and looking at the same thing over and over, then. But at the same time, I know like Steve Dillon. I don't know.
I know.
Might know him. Yeah, he's a talking heads artist. That's what I call it. It's just a bunch of people standing around for the most part. But he does good subtlety of expression, and there's something very entertaining about his simplistic approach. But just like if you were filming a movie, you want to keep things moving along. You want to keep the audience glued to what's happening, and so each panel is a scene unto itself, and you want to tell a story with each panel along the way. But you pick your moments. Like in my head, one thing I've always learned, there should be one panel on each page that is definitely like something you spend more time on. Sometimes it's showing the scene in which showing the scene, showing the landscape in which the whole scene is taking place. Is important to setting up the scene. Or sometimes there's a real pivotal moment in a story, and maybe you need a close-up of somebody's face who's really pissed off, or is talking about betrayal, or something pivotal. But sometimes the quiet moments can be just as important, and you can portray a quiet moment with simple silhouettes, and that will say a lot more than anything else. But I think it's important to break up your style. If you're typically overly detailed, then do some sort of simple illustration, simple panel on each page. But it's got to fit in the story progression. Sometimes lighting. Now, you may have light coming from the east, say, and each panel, the light's hitting the same way. But if you want to shift the viewer's eye, you may break that logic just to make the page more interesting. Who says you got to follow any rules? Every rule is made to be broken. So you may shift the lights for every other panel just to suit the storytelling.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's like learning the rules first so that you can break them, which, that's an old tried and truism, but there's a reason why.
Yeah. Um, like a perfect example of like moments of like where light, you know, like really doing a serious contrast with light is like say there's a storm happening. You hear thunder off in the distance. Your characters are talking or even fighting or whatever. The storm rolls in, and as soon as the first bolt of lightning hits, you get a sheer contrast where the background just goes to stark white and the foreground goes to stark black. So all the characters are seen in silhouette, but it's extreme, lighting can be pivotal to the story as well. The characters in battle, say like one character broke the other character's arm, and
Mhm.
that's exactly when the lightning hits, and you can really feel it. Snap, like it's the lightning and his arm at the same moment.
Yeah, well, that's a great example where you've got the storytelling moment and the visual composition slamming together in a way that comics does so well, of that thing of having the moment of a fight and having that fight impacted by an environmental event.
Right. But yeah, so it's like I keep a lot of things in my head, and I know like when uh, what everybody says is like you have to do 10,000 pages before you get good. Um, I'm a long way from that. But
I'm
for
about
each
10,000
page,
away from that.
but for each page I do, it's like a thousand things are running through my brain. Um, I try to apply a few things at least, um, as just focusing mostly on telling a story. I know, like I've seen a lot of webcomics. That's
Hmm.
pretty much all most of what I'm reading nowadays, anyway. And a lot of them are really just extremely flat. They're all outlines. Some might be better colored than others, um, but a lot of them are just simply people talking. Although some like back the camera away and put some environment into their shots, which is good. But um, mostly it's just flat, two-dimensional kind of images. You gotta break it up. Sometimes a good story moment can take place with a piece of the background in your face, and the camera and the camera characters off in the distance. Um, you got to swivel the camera around. You can also do worm's eye view and bird's eye view, um, and just if you're doing like a horror story, you can go off into all different
The Dutch
things.
angles where you give people a sense of vertigo.
Yeah, you can even do a fisheye
Yeah.
lens kind of thing, and just really just play with the visuals.
Mm.
Uh, you know, and beyond that, you can break the panels. You don't even have to have panels. Although I prefer. But like Gene Colan almost never used panels, and you could pretty much follow the story just based on how he laid out his pages.
Hmm.
But there was an artist, Alex Nino, very stylized artist, and I loved his work. Um, and he crafted like his black and white work, and uh, just extremely juicy to look at, but he also played heavily with how he laid out the page, and sometimes the panels became story elements in and of themselves. Um, you know, it's good to just really take your work as far as you can go with it. Don't
Oh
be
yeah, because I
afraid.
mean, no one's gonna push your boundary. No one's gonna push you to push your boundaries. You kind of have to do it, take it on yourself to say, all right, what can I do with this that I haven't done before? How can I grow and experiment? Although, you know what's funny? I feel like I learn more from my failures than I do from my successes. And whenever I'm working on a page sometimes and I want to try something I've never tried before, or I see this, I'm all, I wonder what would happen if I lit this panel this way, or if I just made this whole figure a silhouette instead, or like tried to render back like background texture on this object that I would normally just leave flat. And whenever I feel like, I don't know, this might wreck the page, I usually want to dive into those things. Because that's what's. I'm at the point now where I'm like, you know what, if I really botch it, I'll just do a patch and I'll print out that panel again and re-ink it. I don't care. But I find that trying to do something that I think I'm likely to fail at, the failures are where the growth lies. So I'm trying to be more courageous with my work and lean into something that I'm all, oh, this could be a train wreck. The more of those I find coming up, the more I wanna lean into them.
Yeah, well, it's a lot like life. You can go through life and play everything safe and never really feel the passion of love or heartbreak, or just get to know people, or just
Mm-hmm.
enjoy life. Or you can risk it, and if you risk it all the time, then you know you
You'll
probably
end up rich but kind of battered, emotionally rich with experience, but beat up probably, some battle scars.
but yeah, definitely, like, anyone who wants to do comics for life, and really do something that's worthy,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of people in this business, and you want to approach things in your style, and have something unique to it. Um, and sometimes you get pigeonholed for that, but that sometimes that's okay, and that's a good thing. At least you remembered. Uh, but you want to take those risks, and you want to it's like I've inked most of my life and doing my own comics now. I don't care if they're not as well done as the comics I did 10 years ago. Of
Mm-hmm.
course they're not going to be. I wasn't writing those books, and I wasn't penciling those books, or coloring those books. I'm doing that now. This is a huge risk for me, um, because I know, like, anybody who's followed me then is still sticking around and looking at my work now and saying, "Oh man, he lost it. What happened?" I don't care, because it's like, well, now I'm doing all my own work, and if you want to check that out, then by all means. Um, I'm not going to be inking the same way, because I'm not inking other people, and I'm also not being paid, a good
Mm-hmm.
sum of money for each page. I'm doing this strictly out of my own pocket, in my own time, and hopefully one day I can make a really great living off of it. But if not, then I'm just doing it because this is really what I wanted to do in the beginning anyway. Um, and I'm seizing the opportunity now. You know, look around when I'm 90 years old and say, ah, man, I should have.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing, is that your work may be of one level of quality when you're just doing one piece of the puzzle. But when you're
Yeah.
doing the entire thing, the writing, the penciling, the inking, the publishing, the lettering, the coloring, all of that, it's your time is fractured now in a way that it wasn't before. Because if you can laser focus on one step of the process, if you can just ink or just pencil, that shit's going to be crisp. Because you're going to come in there and you're just like, this is my job, I'm just going to knock it out and kill it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I find, like, I got a couple of friends that I kind of use as beta readers, and on the latest issue of my comic, I was sending it to them, and they're like, I don't know, dialogue feels a little sparse in some places. And I intentionally try to let the visuals do as much of the storytelling as possible, because, on one hand, dialogue is not my strong suit. I think I'm pretty good at creating a story and making an entertaining story for readers to read, but dialogue in the sense of really getting my characters to have their own distinct voice so they don't all sound alike is a whole new process that I'm working at. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is not have characters speak just to fill up the balloon. Like, if a character is, like, in the middle of a fight, I don't want to necessarily have them making a soliloquy in the middle of that fight. I want to have them say something if they need to say it. If they're in the middle of a fight and they see that someone else is going to get stabbed in the back and they yell to them or tell them something, or if they're trying to convince the person they're fighting to give up, then I'll try to write dialogue that works towards that. But in terms of just having the characters, speaking just so that there's word balloons in every panel, I'm like, if a person in real life wouldn't be talking while they're doing whatever this character is doing, then I'm probably not going to have them talking. And I'm trying to find ways to tell the story more visually, so if a character's by themselves, typically in comics you're either going to have captions telling you what they're thinking, or you're going to have them talking out loud to themselves. And I'm thinking the approach I'm coming with is more cinematic. And I know that's a whole debate, whether to make comics that are more like film, or people that are like, it's its own thing, don't lift from film, tell comics its own way. I feel more like it's stylistic. I think there's lots of great comics that are cinematic. There's lots of great comics that can only ever be done in comics. And I don't think anyone should make a moratorium on what another creator should or shouldn't do. Every creator's got to follow their own muse and their own passion.
Yeah.
But for me, I've been experimenting with just trying to, if a character would really be silent in real life doing what they're doing, then I'm experimenting with letting that just be a silent sequence. And people have noticed that to a negative, because I think they're used to reading, if there's a picture, they want a balloon to go with it. It's pictures and words. It's balloons and drawings. But I've seen people that make a lot of non-verbal comics. Like, for instance, Peter Cooper. Is it Peter Cooper or Peter Cooper Berg? The guy used to do a lot of stuff in heavy metal. It has sort of like a spray paint graffiti look to it.
Okay, right. Yeah.
But yeah, most of his stuff I think is silent, and I think it might be because he's a German artist. I don't know whether he's German or American, but a lot of his stuff is mostly silent. And I think if you go all completely silent, people are like, oh, well, it's a silent comic. Or if you have a lot of dialogue, the way the more like Western comics are, or it's just jam-packed, people are like, oh, well, this is just a regular traditional comic. But I think it's that middle ground where it's sparse dialogue or dialogue as needed, and people are like, I've only seen a few people pull that off really well, and I think I'm aspiring to it, but right now I'm sort of like I'm wrestling with it. Not in a frustrated way, but more sort of like, I didn't get it this time. Let me try a different approach towards it. So,
Yeah.
like you said, when you're working on pages and, that your inking is different from this book versus stuff that you've done for other people, and the whole process, everything looks different. I look at each page as how much of it am I doing for readers and how much of it am I doing for myself. for me, I'm more interested in growing and experimenting and learning. So sometimes that means I'm going to fuck up a page.
Yeah, which, hey, go for it. It's, you know, people say Jack Kirby was king, and he's done hundreds or thousands of books, and not everything he did was was perfect.
True. True.
He had a good 20 years where everything was grade A for sure. But even within his best books, you could probably find a couple of pages where it's like, yeah, I don't know about this. It's like, this looks a little rushed. This doesn't make sense. You know, but like, my brother wrote Jonah Hex for DC, and those issues, a lot of them that I flipped through were heavily scripted, and it worked for his comic and whatnot. And I'm while you were talking, I'm thinking of like Mike Mignola. Mike Mignola, there were pages where, like, if there were 2 words on the page, that was that was a lot.
Oh, yeah. Very sparse dialogue.
Yeah, and then he would, Hellboy would meet a professor or something, and then there'll be like 3 or 4 pages of heavy dialogue, talking about history of whatever demon of the week he was fighting, or mystery behind it, or whatever. And that's, his books flowed really well because he had the right amount of words that you needed,
Yeah, that's exactly. It's one of those things where it's challenging when you like you said, you can call that as a very specific example of like an excellent way of doing it, and it's challenging when you understand the concept and you can point to other people that are doing it, but then when you still try to do it, you're like, well, I know what's going on here. Why isn't it working?
Yeah, but like you said, it's like you're when you're doing a comic and you basically have your own company and you're doing everything across the board, it's hard to keep all the balls in the air and juggle that and do them all to their maximum potential. You do the best you can, and you move on. You'll find, shortcuts or better solutions, but like you say, you don't come across those unless you just take the risk and go for it and make those mistakes and learn from them. Right, Clayton?
Oh, totally. No, I actually, I think in film, I mean, you have a lot of acting in film, which I don't see as much in comic books. But if you could get your characters to act, I think that it'd be even more powerful than movies. That's the whole, like, dialogue versus no dialogue sort of. I'm trying to get my characters more expressive, because I think that's super important,
Yeah, expression is really hard, especially when you're dealing with, like, the comic page aren't really that big, so
Yeah.
it has to be subtlety of form to really come across as, well, they're slightly upset, like, or they're in whatever mood. Like, I know, like, anime is a good example of like this over the top, and it's easy to do over the top, but subtlety is a lot harder. But if that's your focus, man, then go for that because not enough people do that. Just to like portray story as within body movement and expression on their faces and being
Mostly because
something.
my writing's just so horrible. No. No, I think that's what I'm trying to focus on in my comic books, or my comic book to come.
Right.
Expression and.
You know, I've been on a jag of reading some of Eisner's old graphic novels, his Contract of God stuff, and The Dreamer, and The Building, and I mean, you understand why the award is named after him because that book is, to me, feels like it's one of those master classes in all cylinders firing at once. A singular vision of someone writing, drawing, dramatic storytelling, lighting, and like the comics and sequential art book, you know, that he published years ago that everyone has on hand is like, you know, a Bible of storytelling. I feel like I get a lot more out of reading his actual comics than I do out of that book. Like the analysis and the way it was broken down is one thing, but there's literally things where you just watch the storytelling, like within the graphic novels as opposed to his textbooks, just watching his storytelling techniques and his illustration techniques playing out and seeing how they affect. That's one of those where just watching it happen is a lot more educating than having him sit down and explain it to you.
Yeah. Well, Eisner, is definitely a master. I first came across his work in The Spirit, and I picked up. They were collecting The Spirit in magazine form, so I think the art was, you know, it was just bigger, and I devoured that work. He's probably like the first one to inspire like inking, like because his lines were gorgeous and his storytelling was phenomenal. And it's definitely he was never boring. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, you know, there's an artist who worked on each page and didn't just put things randomly. And there's something to be said for that. Like, I don't, you know, I wonder, like, how long, from start to finish, from like concept to finished inks, a page took him. I never like heard him say or read like in an interview about that, but you know, he didn't take shortcuts. Everything was a design and thought out and planned, and he played pretty much like a director, where he set the scene and moved the camera and changed the lighting and did everything. And well, you know, extremely well crafted. Just loved his work. Loved his graphic novels that he did later in life. You know, much like Joe Kubert, like sort of like more. He did similar stuff, like more personal to the artist. It wasn't just sort of comic books, you know, for everybody's entertainment. It was more literature and fine art and gorgeous stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that he could tell stories that were just about the human drama. And it was just about, people getting their heart broken, people making life decisions based on the needs of their family or their health versus what their true passions were. Watching people that did follow their passions and then got their asses handed to them. That was so, the fact that he could make these things so compelling that if you just saw it in like a movie of the week, you would be like, it's not that exciting. But the fact that he could take these very straightforward human dramas and you were captivated, you were gripped, you cared about these characters, and when their hearts were broken, your heart broke a little bit. And that is one of those where it's not the tale, it's the mastery of the telling. And I think that's one of the things that's the golden goose that I feel like most comic creators are pursuing, is to learn how to, no matter what the story is, to be able to tell a story about a kitten trapped in a tree and to take people through a range of emotions in, 12, 22 pages, just over something as simple as that, whether it's told from the cat's perspective or told from the perspective of the kid who's trying to get the cat down, or tell the story of like the person who's watching their child, trying to get through this, or told the perspective of the fireman who gets called to get. There's so many ways you can tell a human story. But if you can get people to feel and empathize and care about these lines on the page and make them live and breathe for them, that's the magic that we're chasing. Well, it's the magic I'm chasing, and I really believe that that's the magic that most of us are chasing too.
Yeah, it's one thing to tell a story, else entirely to tell it well, to be entertaining, to pull at your heartstrings. It's a whole different level.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's something you should be striving for, at least in part, with each page you do.
That's something that's so romantic about comic books. There's so much to accomplish. There's so much potential there. For any artist who wants to tell a story, I think it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it might be like a fun experiment to portray like a deep emotional story, but with limited visuals, just to see if you can pull it off. Not the art, but put a couple of figures there and a simple line for background and maybe some props, and craft a emotional story. Let's see if you can do it.
Well, those are my favorite words right there, just to see if you can pull it off. That's my mantra these days. Because I think once you get to that point where you can pull off like anything that you can imagine, like, oh, I can do this, I can make it work, then you've sort of freed yourself to say, all right, now I'm going to start pushing the boundaries of the content. Because trying to pull something off, like, I think that there's something about that, like, it sounds like we're talking more about story, but I do feel like there's a lot of that where you might have something that's a really compelling, simple character drama, but there's a certain amount of just the drawing that may make it problematic to come off. Like I have trouble doing really cartoony figures because I've never really landed squarely into. I'm not a photorealistic artist, and I'm never gonna be, but I'm also not a cartoony artist either. So I'm trying to, I guess, build an identity in terms of not necessarily finding even a style, but just build my draftsmanship into something where no matter what I see in my head, it's compelling. But I think that the idea of trying to do something, simple and minimalist, there's a certain amount of drawing skill that comes into it where you're telling a dramatic story that way, or a compositional skill that comes into it. And I think once you learn how to make the tools do whatever you want, like a guitarist who, he studied his scales enough that like you show him a chord a couple of times and he's like, all right, I got it. And he can play that beat, he can play that note, he can play that riff. And I think that once once an artist develops their chops, storytelling-wise, draftsman-wise, composition-wise, then you can really start getting into, let me start blowing some people's minds. Let me make Watchmen or The Dark Knight. That's when you can do so much with the tools. Then you can say, all right, how can I blow people's doors off?
Yeah, and it's not. Some people do what I hate is like shock jocks. It's like it's all about making a headline, thereby, making a name for themselves, um, and that's kind of easy to do. I mean, obviously, there's talent that goes into that, because then everybody would be capable of making a name for themselves, and thus we'd all be millionaires tomorrow. But and I forgot where I was going exactly going, but it's just crafting a good story that isn't all,
It's not all hook. It's not like, here's the high
Yeah.
concept and pulls you in because it's got a high concept. It's sort of like
yeah,
something that people are going to care about, something that people are going to want to come back. I think it's not hard to make a comic book that will enter. Well, okay, it is hard. It's hard to make any comic book, but it's one bar to make a book that someone's going to sit there and read it, and when they're done, they feel like they haven't wasted their time. I was entertained by this. This was worth not just the money I spent, but more importantly, the time that I spent, because our time is the most precious commodity we have. It's a whole nother level to make something that people are going to want to reread, to make something that someone's going to want to come back to and experience multiple times just because they enjoy the experience. And it's another whole level to make something that is that compelling and that there's new things for people to discover when they read it. So, I mean, and for me, that's like, I will be grateful if I reach that point anywhere in my life. I will be so utterly grateful. I mean, I'm still, yeah.
I was just gonna say, if Marvel came to you tomorrow and said, we got an issue of X-Men for you to work on, do you want to be the guy that does the comic just to fill in the gap between the issue before and the issue after, or do you want your issue to stand out and make a statement above and beyond just filling a gap in the story? I know there's a stack of John Byrne issues of X-Men that he worked on that will forever be in my memory because it was just it's well crafted, well told. Him and Claremont were hitting all the targets that really are still to this day better than almost every other issue of X-Men for me personally, because they were just, it's beloved characters. I really felt for them, and each one going on to different journeys. It was just a great time within the whole X-Men universe, and
Oh, yeah.
really just like from beginning to end, and it just kept me captivated because it was, even though a lot of them were like single issue stories, they were plot threads throughout, and but they made a real statement, and I guess that's more than anything else. It's like I don't want to be, I eventually want to be somebody who could come in for one issue, pick up where previous issue left off, and leave it to the next team. But to really make a statement and not just visually, artistically superior, but to really get the characters and portray them individually is not an easy thing, you know, to give each character their own character.
Oh no, that's hugely challenging. It's and I think that's where one of those things where experience comes in. Like experienced creators come in and they hone the craft. Trying different ways and figure out who is this person. It's almost like they need to live in a character's skin for a little while, or if they're just an experienced writer who understands character and story, then they can build in their mind who is this person to them. And even if that personality is a little bit different from what other writers or other creators have expressed them, if that character feels true, you'll say, oh, hey. Instead of it saying, oh, they're not writing the character right, they're going to say, oh, this is an aspect of their personality I'd never seen before. Like when you meet a friend that you've known for years, and then you find out something about them that you didn't know, that puts them in a whole new context. You're like, wow, really? You used to, you went mountain climbing in Nepal, or you used to, raise sea lions? It's just like you discover something, and they just reframe the person completely. And I think that's the difference between somebody who comes in and is sort of like servicing the character versus somebody who's coming in and servicing makes it sound is an unfair word to use. 'Cause I think there's lots of times you have to come in and you're given a difficult task with a character you may not know or you may not be passionate about, and you're trying to do justice to them. So servicing them, I made it sound negative. I don't think it's a negative, but elevating the character, getting into them, and creating something that will take people who really love this character and make them, resonate. I remember listening to an interview one time with Nicholas Myers, the director of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan.
Oh, okay.
And in the interview, he was talking about spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen The Wrath of Khan. But when they were filming Spock's death scene, like throughout the entire production, they were not sure exactly how to treat this take, because the first Star Trek movie was really slow and plodding. It didn't have the boom 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 beats of the TV series, but it wasn't necessarily an action sci-fi film like a Star Wars film. It was this kind of philosophical, meditative film. So they wanted to have something for Wrath of Khan that had a lot more action, which when Nicholas Meyer read the script, he kind of looked at it and he saw, this is Horatio Hornblower. This is a sea battle in space. This is a big epic. So he tried to make it like these captains, these dueling captains between Kirk and Khan, putting all these battles in there. But he didn't come from sci-fi. He wasn't a fan of Star Trek. So they brought this guy in who, he was just servicing the characters, but he tried to find something new in the characters that was both true to him and he hoped would be true to the audience. And the specific story he was telling was that on the day that they filmed the Spock's death scene, he's sitting there, and it's like action. The character going through and they're doing their lines, and they're almost they're getting close to the end of the scene. He kind of sees the cameraman kind of pull back and wipe his eyes a little bit, and then they finish. It says cut, and he looks, and the cameraman turns back and just bawling, just tears, just streaming from his face, and he's just like, wow. And then he kind of hears that behind him, like sniffles, and he looks around. The rest of the crew, everyone on set, is just captivated, watching it and in tears. And I know it's nerdy and fanboy, but to this day, if I watch that scene from the original Wrath of Khan, it's really hard for me to not tear up. It gets me every time.
Yeah.
And that's somebody who wasn't a fan.
It has nothing to do with being a fan of Star Trek or being a fanboy. It's just a well-told story when it comes down to it. You could probably, lots of fanboys can get their girlfriends into it. because it's just a well-told story.
Yeah, I mean, you show somebody something good, and
Yeah.
they're like, it doesn't really matter what the genre is, as long as people are entertained and they can find. I think for all forms of storytelling and literature and art and music, it's being able to show somebody something that's true. Truth
Yeah.
is the hardest thing to carve out, but it's the thing that's most appreciated and that people really respond to.
This reminds me. There's an issue of was it Excalibur? No, X Factor.
Mm-hmm.
X written by I think it was Peter David. It was illustrated by Joe Quesada.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that run. I loved that. That was my
It
first time I really got into Peter David.
it was my favorite issue because it was and I think Samson.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Doc
Samson,
Samson.
he's a therapist, and it's my favorite issue because previous it's just like, all right, here's a bunch of characters flying around, kicking ass or getting their ass kicked. I couldn't care less, but fun visuals, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but that issue came around, and it's like, okay, it's basically a Talking Heads issue. Um, but it's a lot more entertaining because we're getting inside the characters' heads, into their personalities, and I really liked them all. I understood some of them a lot better, and we found out some of their motivations, and it was like this issue makes every other issue that much better because now I understand what the hell's going on, with these characters.
Oh yeah, that was a seminal issue. I definitely
Yeah.
remember that one too, and a lot of people cite that as like a big turning point for X Factor, and like it was one of those. It made me like Quicksilver a lot. Like I think he became my favorite character in that issue, and I've always had kind of a soft spot for him since then because like for as weird as creepy and obnoxious as he is, you understand how frustrated. You just see him as an arrogant jerk, but you never understand how completely frustrated he is with just everyone around him. You know, and it's weird because Wally West and Barry Allen just so sweet. They're just kind, patient. They're speedsters, but they're so warm. But Quicksilver, which again, that's one of the things that Marvel heroes are so great at, is being flawed and having feet of clay. And Quicksilver is like, yeah, I think this is probably more how I would feel if I had super speed. I'd probably be frustrated like he is.
It's basically like, come on already. I'm over here now. Yeah.
It's funny. When you were talking about John Byrne earlier and his X-Men run, I think most comic creators at some point have a John Byrne book that hooked them. And for some people, it's his Man of Steel run. For some people, it's X-Men. For some people, it's his Fantastic Four work. I had my Byrne phase, but I get laughed at every time I tell people. But it was his West Coast Avengers run. That's the book that got me from going to my local bookstore and buy stuff on the newsstand. That's the one that got me to seek out a comic book shop and say, all right, I need to catch the issues I hadn't read, get caught up on where it's going, and make sure I get each issue month to month. There was something about that run, and I think it was that discovery that I didn't even know who the West Coast Avengers were. I barely was getting into comics, and other than Captain America and Iron Man, and Thor, I didn't really know. And that was at the point at which time the Avengers already had that massive rotating roster.
Right.
But 'cause, yeah, this was like late '80s, early '90s.
Okay.
And I think, but with the West Coast Avengers, it was like this clean slate of these characters that, I only knew a little bit about, but just watching them kind of grow and go on this journey, and again, that's one of the things that Byrne is masterful at, because I think this was one of those that he was writing and drawing, and it brought you in. He created a world and populated it with interesting characters, and the things that were fascinating to me were the human struggles of the character. Their interpersonal drama was far more interesting to me than whatever villain they were fighting.
Right.
Like, I think that whole thing they had with Wonder Man being in love with Scarlet Witch, and it makes complete sense because Scarlet Witch was in love with an android whose personality was built around his brainwaves while everyone thought he was dead. So it would make sense that, like, the Vision would be like a brother to him, and then once the Vision's gone, he's like, oh my god, I'm in love with his widow. And just the drama that made of, because honestly, it's something that I could relate to being in, like, junior high, that whole thing of, like, always being the friend of the, the friend of the guy that the girl liked, as opposed to being the guy the girl liked, and having that whole thing of just knowing that you're like, oh, he's my friend, and I'm not going to stab him in the back, but I want her, and I want her a lot more than I think he actually wants or even cares about her, and you're just like, oh, this sucks. You're just stuck in there in that sense of loyalty to your friend, loyalty to the girl who actually views you as a friend, and then, like, your actual inner conflict of what you want for yourself.
Right.
I think the book just hit me at that time, but it captured something that a lot of people can relate to.
I remember that storyline. I'm pretty sure I didn't pick up West Coast Avengers. I could be wrong, but
in the pantheon of Byrne books, most people are not. That's why I say people laugh at me. That's not necessarily one. That's not at the top of people's list. That's funny.
Well, it's sort of like Force Works.
Yeah.
It's like I did I worked on a Century. Is it like a double issue? I even forget what they call it. It was just a giant issue.
Mm-hmm. A milestone issue.
No, well, it was separate to anything else.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a one shot.
Mm-hmm.
Before there were really one shots. But it was like, beginning to end, it was a story unto itself. I don't think it tied in anywhere else other than it had Century in it, and it might have mentioned he was in Force Works. But it was like, Cal Fury penciled it, I inked it. I forget who wrote it. But it was like, I was really proud of that. I didn't work on anything bigger than a single issue previous to that, and I was like so proud of it, and it just like flew in and flew out, and like, man, it's like, didn't anyone see it?
Yeah, that's that's the kind of the weird thing with the industry, is that unless something is going to be collected and it's part of some sort of big run, there's so many stories that just come and go, and it's that monthly churn. There's so many books that come out and people may not even remember them, even though at the moment that it came out, it was actually something that was interesting and dynamic. We're like, oh wow, this is kind of cool, but there's always something coming out next month, and there's always that next issue. It feels like there's just like the readership memory is real short.
Yeah, I think the time of Force Works was pretty much near an end at the point where it came out, and it was just like, don't really care about that. So it's not that I don't put my heart and soul on every page, even as just an anchor, to everything I do, but it's like I really thought that would be at least some sort of milestone, and it was like, well, you just don't know. I was watching, I don't know, some cast talking about their experience working on a movie, and they were just saying, like, you really don't know if this is going to be a huge hit or a big flop. Everybody who's working on it puts in their heart and soul, and that's pretty much the case in everything. Independent movies, major blockbuster movies, whatever. All the behind the scenes is sort of like the same sort of mood. They're really just putting everything they got into it, but once it comes out, it's up to the audience, the time it comes out, the distribution, everything is a factor, and some hit, some don't, some become history, some like I guess Rocky Horror Picture Show. I'm not sure if that did any business when it was out in the theaters. Originally.
No, I don't think it did.
Yeah, but that built up a huge cult following, and it was in many theaters, midnight showings and whatnot, years and years after. And there's a lot of there's a collection of movies like that people can always will always go back to and rewatch and rewatch. That the movie itself didn't do any business when it came out.
I'm wondering if there's any good examples, because I can't think of any off the top of my head, but comics that were almost, even if they weren't necessarily a hit, but maybe even almost a bomb when it came out, but people sort of rediscovered them years later. Like, I know when, in film examples, Fight Club, is notoriously one of those films that it's made the most movie on DVD sales for Fox as a studio of just about anything they've ever put out. But it really was in and out of the theaters fast and really underperformed. And I remember seeing it in the theaters and feeling like it was this stroke of genius, but then it was gone. I didn't get a chance to re-see it again until it came out on DVD. And I'm wondering if there's anything like that in comics. Like, nothing pops up at the top of my head, just thinking. But it feels like there, with reprints and trades, there's always stuff that people can rediscover, or they find in the. You know what? No, that's not true. I was gonna say maybe American Flag, but because I never found it reprinted anywhere, I just found all of the first comics issues until Image and Dynamite started reprinting them in the past couple of years. But American Flag was one of those where to me, it was always a cult classic. There were always creators talking about the storytelling and the lettering, the politics, and Chaykin's pacing and composition. Yeah. And I would read an issue or two here and there, but I never went out and collected all of the back issues because I felt like it was one of those that I really needed to read it as a whole. I just knew just from the couple of issues I had read, I knew how complex it was. And I waited until they reprinted that hardcover a couple of years ago that had the first 12 issues, and I sat down and read that through. And I almost feel like, on one hand, I probably would have learned a lot more if I had been able to read that whole run, in my formative years. Right. But it felt worth it to read it in this one volume all the way through.
Yeah, there's another guy, Howard Chaykin, man. His, a lot of stuff he does is flat, but there is a lot of design and thought that goes into everything he does, and if you get a chance, American Flag or his older work, and he's done a lot of very pretty illustrative stuff as well. There's a guy, huge talent, and I'm not sure if it was a financial hit when it was out with American Flag, but it was definitely talked about, and everybody knew of it. At least in my circle, it felt that way. You know how your circle of friends you could talk to you blue in the face about something that you love and you're passionate about, and then years later, you find out everybody else was into it too, but just your particular circle of friends knew nothing about it. I got that a lot. But yeah, I think it was definitely a well-known book. I know, being an independent, more at the time when that was published was a lot harder to sort of make any money. Um,
Hmm.
like speaking of which, like when John Byrne, who is a household name, was doing Next Men, his own creator-owned characters, he wasn't making enough money, and he eventually stopped producing issues. And there's a book I loved. I think since he got back to it and did another miniseries to it or something, but there's a guy like huge name in comics, goes off and does his own creator-owned characters, and doesn't make enough money to continue. So it's definitely not easy for.
Yeah, I mean that just seems criminal to me. That when he's doing his own thing, he's going to pour more creativity into that and more innovation than I think just about anything else you'd see. Coming out from most other creators, and the fact of not being able to continue with it just because the financial audience isn't there, even if people are giving a lot of critical acclaim. I remember that was one that I was reading as it was coming out, and it's
Yeah.
yeah, it was definitely made a huge impact, but it was one of those things where it was weird in the sense that it had some of the best of Fantastic Four and the best of X-Men kind of mixed together. I mean, I know that Danger Unlimited
Yeah.
was really like the Fantastic Four, but
Right.
it was also it had this very interesting sophistication where you had this whole idea of realities within realities, kind of like the Matrix before the Matrix.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the whole series was sort of like became kind of an unreliable narrator to a certain extent, and it was, but not in a negative way. It was fascinating because there's like it really felt like a book that you did not know where things were going to go. And I think that's another thing that's challenging is when obviously I've never worked on a mainstream book, but that whole idea of keep making sure that the characters are for the most part intact, that they're not when you're done with your story, whatever you put them through, that unless you're given an edict to revolutionize the character, in the end he's got to look kind of close to story-wise and content-wise. He's got to be not too different from where he was when you found him. It's like you take a girl out for a date in high school. Your dad's like, all right, go out, have fun, but you better bring her back by 10, and the way that she left the house.
Yeah, it's like, I worked on Aquaman when he was in the whole, he had his hand chopped off, he had a hook on, he had his hair really long and a full beard, and his costume was totally different, and you don't see that nowadays.
Yeah, no, they cleaned him up.
Yeah, they cleaned him up. I mean, they reverted the whole DC universe, but that particular look didn't last forever,
Mm-hmm.
and who knows? They may be bringing that look up for the movies, but we'll see.
Mm.
Because they got I think it's one of the actors from Stargate Atlantis, Jason, I forget, Momoa.
Momoa. Yeah, he's on. Have you watched any of Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's what's his name? The Dragon
Khal
Lady's.
Drogo.
Yeah.
He's pretty badass on Game of Thrones. That was the first place I saw him. I didn't know he was on Stargate, but yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed him on Game of Thrones. So I figure he's a good choice for giving the character some gravitas. Because I know like they had that story in the news a few weeks back where Zack Snyder was on like a radio show defending how cool Aquaman is, and so like the people that were busting chops on Aquaman, and he always gets that as a character. I haven't had a chance to watch any of Batman: The Brave and the Bold, but I had heard that their interpretation of him on Brave and the Bold was a really good take on the character, where you got a sense of this is how cool this character is.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of it, and I think it is like they have him in beard and stuff. So it's kind of two interpretations. There's that sort of really real kingly, uh, manly, muscle-bound Aquaman. Then there's the thinner, almost surfer dude kind of Aquaman. What am I saying, Batman?
That's exactly how I would have phrased it.
But yeah, it's a character I always liked, and I used to watch Entourage because that was sort of the inside joke there that the main character is an actor trying to get some really good parts in movies and whatnot, and he winds up getting the lead in a movie, Aquaman. It's directed by James Cameron.
Which would be a great choice.
Yeah, it would. But, I'm really interested in what DC's going to do with the character. I mean, frankly, all the characters, they haven't been as successful as Marvel has. But, I still want to see, like, independent comics make movies.
Well, I haven't had a chance to see Chronicle, that one movie with it's like a found footage film of these kids that basically end up getting superpowers in some experiment, but a lot of people have made comparisons between that and Akira in terms of like a superhero movie. But
is that based on a comic?
Well, it's not based on a comic per se, but the tone of it is that you start thinking it's just like a coming-of-age story of teenagers, and you start realizing it is a superhero movie, but it's an indie superhero film that's not based on an existing property.
Okay. Yeah. I seen that. I liked it. I forget my exact feel of it, but I think I pretty much just enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those that was out of the theaters before I had a chance to see it, and then I usually just wait till something pops up on Netflix, and when it's available for me to stream, then I'll watch it. So it's one of those that I have an eye out for. I just haven't sat down and watched yet. But
I want to mention a couple of things since we're going in that territory.
Go for it.
I did see Men in Black 3. Now, I really liked Men in Black, the first one. The second one, I almost thought it was crap, in the sense that, it was well done, it was enjoyable, but I felt it was really a repeat of the first one, much like how I kind of felt of Iron Man 2. It was like the first one, but with less soul. And I avoided Men in Black 3 like the plague. But I did finally sit down because I just watched it for free, and I loved it. I thought it was definitely the best one of the three. It was so good, so fun, hilarious, touching, everything across the board. Maybe because I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna like it, but I don't care. It's I just want to watch something new that I haven't seen, and but it was like kudos. It's because another part of it was because at the time, it's like, well, here's Will Smith doing Men in Black 3. I heard he's going to do Bad Boys 3. He's just trying to make a buck.
He's trying to retire. He's saving up that cash. He's trying to cash out.
Yeah, it's like, I love him to death, and he's done many movies that are awesome. But I've seen what was it called? Happiness, The Pursuit of Happiness, and it's like, well, that's what Will Smith should be doing. Stop doing the summer blockbuster movies that you're just making pocket money, and go back and do these independent movies that have real heart and soul and give us life lessons, But all that aside, even feeling all that internally, it's like I really liked Men in Black 3. It was definitely worth seeing. And so I saw that. I saw the new Guardians. Definitely recommend that. The Guardians of the Galaxy, which is a movie based on a comic book, and talk about a comic book that was nothing when it originally came out. I mean, it might have done good for Marvel. People might have bought issues. I think I read it back when.
No, I bought the Valentino '90s reboot of it. That was when I was reading it. I haven't read any of the current Guardian stuff.
No, either have I. But the original, I don't know if it was really that big a hit.
It was not.
But here, they sort of reinvent the whole Guardians, and I think the original was in the year 3000, but the current group is in current continuity or something. And it's different cast and whatnot, whatever. But the movie was awesome, and definitely go see it. But I wanted to mention, I don't know if you know Wes Anderson.
Yes, I have. I know quite a few of his movies.
Yeah, he is. I love his stuff, and it's a certain taste. He's a
Quirky.
independent. Yeah, very quirky is usually how I put it. I saw the Budapest Hotel.
Yeah, Grand Budapest Hotel.
Grand Budapest Hotel. I freaking loved it.
That
I was laughing out loud. I was dying. It was awesome movie.
Yeah, that was gnarly. I like that movie a lot.
Yeah, it's just like, I mean, it's got a phenomenal cast. It's got a lot of actors you may have seen throughout the years. And it's a very quirky, stylized movie. I know somebody said they tried to watch it, but just the style of it took them out of it, out of the story.
Because it's very rat-a-tat-tat, like a lot of jumps, a lot of cuts, and moving you around. But I felt like it was like they were just downloading information into the it's visually rich. And some people, I think, were a little bit overwhelmed by that, but that's what I loved about it.
Yeah. I could see where his sort of style and approach would take you out of just the flow of the story, because you're constantly like aware of what you're looking at. But I thought it was his best work. I loved it to death. I just couldn't stop laughing. It was hysterical, and touching, and it was just wonderful. I wasn't expecting that, because I tried to watch what was it, Moonlight Kingdom?
Yeah, Moonrise Kingdom.
Moonrise Kingdom, and I couldn't get into that, although I will get back to it and watch it again. I don't know. I wasn't in the mood to watch a Western movie at the time, I guess. It just I couldn't get into it, and that's unusual. So it was probably just the mood I was in, which heavily affects my enjoyment of any movie.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But Budapest Hotel, man, it was so awesome. I
Hmm.
loved it to death.
Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of Wes Anderson movies. The thing is, I've liked all the ones I've seen, but I haven't seen like every movie of his. Like I haven't seen The Fantastic Mr. Fox,
No,
and
I
I still
haven't.
haven't seen The Life Aquatic, which a lot of people love.
You
But
should definitely see that.
I have the Royal Tenenbaums on DVD, and it's one of those that I haven't gone back and rewatched it in a while because it's one of those movies that it's so enjoyable, but so depressing at the exact same time.
Yeah,
But you
yeah,
kind of have to steel yourself for it. Because I mean, like you said with the Grand Budapest Hotel, that one was it was like madcap and zany. So when it had these heartfelt moments that were a little bit sad, they kind of got you emotionally. But it was sort of like comforting in the way that like a good Spielberg film is.
yeah.
Um, Whereas the Royal Tenenbaums is just one of those where it was the opposite, where there was weird, quirky, funny things in it, but it's in comparison to like such emotionally dark material and the relationships of this, how messed up this family is. It's like the laughs almost just give you a space to breathe in between the agony and the emotional torment.
Yeah. Spoilers, it all ends up okay, but for the most part. Uh, but yeah, there's dark moments, and it's his characters are rich by having that sort of just original essence to them. Um, that I mean, not original as in like there's plenty of people I could picture being the characters in his movies. Um,
Mhm.
but what was the Royal Tenenbaums? What was the first one?
I haven't seen the first one, but it was Bottle Rocket. That's another one that he did with
Oh,
Luke and Owen Wilson.
yeah, that was yeah, his first attempt. Not the most popular one. I think it became popular after the fact.
Hmm.
But that was enjoyable. That was, it's all those movies are the same but different for the most part. I haven't seen, like you said, the Fox one,
Hmm.
but that's I have to be in the mood to watch a sort of animated but not uh, creation. Um, but the one with Jason Schwartzman and was it
Oh,
Bill Murray?
Rushmore
Rushmore.
with Bill
Yeah,
Murray.
yeah.
I
That was really his first
hmm
popular.
I liked Rushmore, but I didn't love Rushmore. I think that one was. I feel like the tone that he has now. This Rushmore felt me closer to the Royal Tenenbaums than it does like any of the funnier stuff he's done since. And it was a tough one for me to get into. I think I would probably go back and watch some of the other ones that I haven't seen before going back and revisiting that one. But I mean, I've been over the past couple of years trying to go and watch great movies that I had never seen before. Like I didn't even see Citizen Kane for the first time till like 5 years ago, and I specifically bought it on DVD just because I'm tired of people saying what, screaming what every time I told them I hadn't seen Citizen Kane. And what was
uh,
funny is when I watched it, I saw a lot of comparisons between him and Rupert Murdoch. Like it's more like he was a liberal version of Rupert Murdoch.
right.
But it actually felt very contemporary to me. Like I'm all, yeah, I
Yeah.
can see these same power struggles about the media and about someone who has financial power, trying to use it to influence politics.
Yeah.
Like all of it felt very, very contemporary to me. And considering the fact of how much, it's sort of weird that watching it now and knowing, I know on a conscious level that he invented a lot of the modern contemporary visual storytelling techniques in film. But considering that I've seen them so many times in so many other mediums, I don't think it's capable for anyone of the modern era to truly have that sense of awe that people must have had when they were seeing this stuff for the first time. Like, in the way that I've only in the past couple years really started to come around to Kirby. Like, I didn't like Kirby so much when I first... I think that's true of a lot of people. Some people get Kirby right away. Some people it takes time to really understand what he's doing under the skin.
Right.
But that idea that all of the things that we're watching, like when you're reading an early Kirby comic, it's one thing to know that he was inventing a lot of that visual language, but it can't ever be the same as being a kid reading something for the first time and having their doors blown off because they've just never seen this before. It's going to have a different impact when we've grown up. We've seen books from the 70s and the 80s, and we've seen and I don't mean negative derivatives, but I mean people who have taken the foundry, the groundwork that Kirby laid, and they've built other stuff on top of it. And when you've seen the stuff they've built on top of it first, it's almost you come back to you're like, oh, well, this is cool, and this is, oh yeah, this is an early version of this, and yeah, these energy crackles I see everywhere. This is where it came from. It's not the same as seeing something that's like out of the fourth dimension. You're like, this did not exist before. And seeing something that didn't exist before is very, very different from seeing something and seeing, oh, this is the origin of all the things that I see around me now.
Yeah, I saw Citizen Kane when I was in school, and it was presented in such a way that this was, the first of its kind. This was the origin of a lot of what people who are making movies now are inspired from. So, it did have that sense of awe for me. Mm-hmm. But if it's just somebody who watches the movie now and happens across it in their whatever, Redbox, whatever exists nowadays. It's like, yeah, you can look at it as like, oh yeah, I've seen all this before. You won't take it as something truly like that is art. It's pretty much like seeing a statue by Da Vinci and not really truly appreciating it unless you see it in person or just have the whole history of it, read about the history of it and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things, like, it's interesting you said seeing the history about it. It just reminded me of the fact that when I was in school, I was never that interested in art history. Like, I was interested in specific artists and if I liked their work, but art history itself didn't really hold a lot of interest for me.
Right.
And part of the problem is that as a kid, I wasn't that interested in history. I wasn't a history buff, and I think that's common with a lot of kids. Is you're like, I care about what's affecting me now. I don't care about stuff that happened hundreds of years ago.
I'm the same way. Yeah.
But I've gotten older, and when I start to realize how much things that happened hundreds of years ago have shaped everything that we deal with today, it makes me a lot more interested in history. And through that context, through that lens, art history became more interesting to me because I realized if you look not just at the work that someone was making in the past, but if you look at the world around them and what they were experiencing at the time, how society was, how people consumed content, how people consumed art, the different purposes of art, that had then as opposed to now. I mean, we're living in a world now where it seems like visual arts, other than filmmaking and TV, seems like it's less and less, serving less and less of a purpose. You know.
Yeah, well, it's there's appreciation of all art out there, and just because it isn't as mass popular doesn't mean it's not as important. It's like I see bookstores dying left and right. It doesn't mean there won't be a future without, there'll still be books around. Even if digital goes 99%, there'll still be books in the future because there is that history within those pages, and they have historical significance as well as just like, man, this is where it started. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you mentioning the digital books. I have a weird relationship with digital in the sense that I don't want to live in a world that doesn't have local comic shops. Local comic shops gave me so much growing up in terms of just a place, a community, and a way to experience art of all kinds of styles and techniques and stories of all different genres. That said, I'm very fortunate to live in a part of LA that has a lot of great comic book shops within driving distance, and I don't visit them that often. And I kind of feel I feel comic creators guilt. It's not even comic fan guilt, but the fact that I want this thing to exist, but I'm not actually putting money into the stores. And there's multiple reasons, because on one hand, I don't have as much time to. I tell this to people when I'm at comic conventions, and I'm like in Artist Alley, and I ask people what they're reading, because I just want to see what people are into and maybe figure out some other stuff to pick up. But the more time you spend making comics, the less time you have reading them. It's like anytime you're really committing time and hours to something, you don't have the time to sit there and just take in books just to read them. And then there's the actual physical space. Because I moved into a new apartment a month ago, and my girlfriend and I, we had to buy like 2 new bookcases because between the two of us, we just have so many books. And when I was at my old place, they were just like, at a certain point, a pile of books becomes furniture to place more books on. Like it just once the piles reach about hip height, then it's like, all right, you're now officially a coffee table made out of books. But the thing I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to stop buying as many books and just read all of the books I have that I saw this, I know I'm going to want to read it, so I picked up a copy. So I'm consuming less, but in terms of bringing books into the house, because I'm sitting here and I'm like, let me actually read all the stuff I have that I haven't read.
Yeah.
And then there's the fact that in terms of trying to become a better writer, I'm trying to read novels that I like, stuff like Crime and Punishment, and I'm reading East of Eden by John Steinbeck right now because for some reason, I've read The Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men, but there's lots of great books of literature that somehow or another I escaped high school without reading, and I'm trying to go back and read now because I figure, they say that the people who do the best work in comics, whether you're a writer or an artist, are people who are bringing stuff from outside, going and looking at other sources and then trying to bring the best work from other media into comics. So I'm also trying to spend more time reading prose novels and great works of literature that I'd never read before just to educate myself better so I can hopefully practice my craft better. But these are all things that are keeping me out of the comic shop, the physical space, the reading other materials, the time creating, and it's like I can't just go in and buy comics that I'm not going to read or don't have time or money to spend on. But at the same time, I feel bad because the retailers, I do feel like they need the support of comic fans. Digital at least makes the easy part of the running out of space because there's tons of books that I want to read but don't want to keep.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Well,
there's always just
look at it.
regifting comics.
There you go. You can look at it this way to alleviate your guilt. You know, were you a fan of paper comics for many, many years? Did you not support comic stores in that time? Um, you know, I know myself, there was a point where I was picking up literally 150 different comics a month by, Marvel, DC, and various independents, um, and spending tons of money. I put in my time, I put in my money. It may not be currently,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but I do plan to have books that are printed. So, that's my way. That's going to be my way of giving to the continuation of comic stores by actually producing books that they'll put on their shelves, of a decent quality, and hopefully a great quality one day when I start mastering more of my techniques and abilities. Um, so, it's you can't do everything, and you don't have all the time in the world. I wish I could spend a week in my apartment just catching up on the stacks of comics I have here. Um, but my reading habits have gone to shit. um, and I used to be a big novel reader,
Mm-hmm.
but it's everything. Every time I attempted it in the last year, it's just I do it once or twice or three times, and then I forget about it for another month. It's horrible. Um, but I'm just too busy. I'm reading emails. I'm catching up with friends. I'm reading a lot more that has nothing to do with real writing. But it is good to make time for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to find that balance between focusing on putting work out and also recharging the creative batteries by consuming other content. Because I am the type of person who I can just sit down and go like a month at a time and just draw, 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 draw. Don't really do anything. Well, if I'm going to do something else, it's probably not going to be TV. Like I'll watch a little bit of TV, just have quality time with my girlfriend. But other than that, it's usually more like I'd rather sit down with a good book and lose myself in that. But I'll do it for a couple of hours, and then, like the itch to make something just it does not leave me for long. And I think part of that is the fact that
Right.
I still have a day job, so I'm not working on comics full time. Because I could see if I were doing it, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, then I might be like, I don't want to draw a goddamn thing. But on my own, I'm lucky if I get in more than an hour a day's worth of work. Like for me, it's usually like on a given. It's more like I'll clear out a couple of nights a week where I can do like 2 hours, maybe 3 hours if I stay up a little bit late in the evening. And I'll usually get in like an hour's worth of work during the day. And really, it's the weekends that I jam on it. And so I always have this constant feeling like right when I'm really starting to get a page singing, and I'm like, oh wow, I'm really enjoying this. I'm into the creative flow. I have to make that decision. Do I want to be a wreck for work tomorrow, or do I want to go and turn in and get a reasonable amount of sleep so I can come in and do my job? And
Yeah.
What do you do?
I am very fortunate because I have a creative day job.
Oh,
I
sweet.
am a packaging designer for a toy company. So I do a lot of Illustrator and Photoshop and designing packaging, and I get to do a little bit of product design. Um, I actually think product design is a lot harder than packaging design because packaging design is not, it's just moving the pieces around until you have a certain amount of information you have to get on a package, and it's just moving it around, obeying the laws of composition, and trying to find a way to unify, the color, the layout of the content, so that it services the information needs but doesn't look ugly. Like that's the sad truth for me, is that packaging design is not about trying to design something that's awesome. It's about fighting off ugliness for me. Because I find that more often than not, everybody wants to put the kitchen sink on every single package. It's like trying to letter a comic page that's way too crammed and left no space for the balloons, and then you realize somebody hands you and you realize that it's a 3-shot of characters that are all talking. That's what packaging design feels like a lot of the time. It's just trying to cram in all of this different information and not have it look like a mess and a hodgepodge. But there's something to be said, obviously, on the upside of having a day job that is creative. Some people I've heard say it's better to have a day job that isn't, so that you can just kind of shut your mind off and not waste any of your creative juices, and then you just come home and knock it out. You just come home and you let all of your creative energy flow. Whereas if, let's say that you're a storyboard artist or an animator, you might enjoy that work, but you come home creatively exhausted, and the part of your brain that you would use to tell stories is tapped. And you just, even if the passion, the desire is there, you may not have the mental energy to do it. I don't find that the case in my job, because I think I've been doing it so long that it's kind of like autopilot for me. I really, I can listen to podcasts while I'm designing. My boss, who does a lot of the actual product design, he can't have anyone speak while he's working. He can have music on, but he can't do that at all. Whereas for me, it's like I kind of shut my brain off when I'm doing design work. For instance, I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you guys while inking a page. Inking, I can talk to people while I'm inking. I cannot talk while I'm doing layouts. And to some degree, I definitely can do it while I'm doing layouts, and it's difficult to do it while if I were doing pencils, there's still a lot more of me laying down the structure. Whereas inking kind of feels like it's decorating to me, It feels like it's the pleasant part of painting. I'm not struggling over it. I'm just laying down tones and laying in textures, and I'm moving pieces around. And I am drawing to some degree because my pencils are pretty loose. So, it's not like just simply laying down lines over a really tight artist and you're just trying to balance line weights and textures and create a pleasing visual flow. I am more engaged in making sure that the joints connect properly and trying to make sure that things are going the proper directions in space and feel structurally solid. But still, I can sit here and have a conversation. Which
I'm a way quiet worker, so whenever I don't know, I'll talk to myself sometimes, which I'm trying to tone down a little bit just for you guys, so you don't think I'm crazy or something.
I'd love to hear your crazy art rants while you're working. That's kind of that's sort of the nice studio thing, is just be in the studio and hearing other people with their thoughts and what's running through their head as they were working. At one point, Peter, while you were talking before, I almost wanted to jump out and mention, because I'm working on a page and I put down an ink line and immediately my mind goes, oh, I'm going to wipe that line out. That was horrible. But I just keep going. But it's there's constantly the mental flow of keeping check of stuff that happens while you're working, of the stuff that you're all, oh, this is working, this is not working, this sucks, I'm going to patch out this entire page. Or just something that I'm I lightly rendered this, I'm going to come back and add some more detail to it, but I'm going to move on to the panel now. But it was just the thought of putting down a line and instantly knowing it's wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Clay, by all means, I love to hear your rants as you're working stuff out. But the one thing I was going to mention though, it relates to people talking while doing art. Last night I had a get together. I had some friends come over, and they are not artists per se. One guy's a graphic designer, but the rest of them don't necessarily come from a creative background. And I think we can all relate to people wanting to spend time with us that we care about that are in our lives, and we don't because you always have stuff to do creatively. There's never enough time to get all the stuff you want to do done. So my plan was to have an art party. I bought like some really cheap canvas boards and a cheap set of acrylic paints and a bunch of cheap brushes, and I just invited friends over, and I said, we're going to hang out, and we're going to like make art. So we just had a party, laid some tarps on the table, had some alcohol, some music, and we just sat around and everybody painted. And it was cool because, for them, they haven't painted since they were kids or they were in school. And they're sitting there and there's no pressure to make a finished piece or do something in a particular style. And my whole plan was I was going to do just one painting because they were like small canvases, like 4 by 6 inches, or they were like 6 by 6. And I thought I would just do one painting, and then once everyone else got going and they were painting on stuff, I was going to go grab my comic pages. And then I'm like, this is what I really want, is to hang out with my friends while I'm working on my comics. Because I'm all, this is the reason why you never see me at the bar, because I'm here trying to get stuff done.
Yeah, I wish, I spent many years working alone at home, not really communicating much with anyone except maybe the penciler for the duration of just getting work done, which is, when I was inking for Mall in D.C., it was at least 6 days a week, working 10-hour days, and just I would get out in the evenings or one day on the weekend or something. But yeah, it was I was listening to radio, I guess, back when. There wasn't much else. I couldn't watch TV years back. I couldn't watch any TV or have the TV on. It was just either the radio or at various points just playing records or whatever I had. Albums. But yeah, nothing like this. I mean, this, I'm sort of hosting and I got to keep watch of things. I'm sort of hosting. Well, I am hosting. But so I'm just sketching, which is I don't get enough time in my days to typically just spend time just doodling, which is I don't know if you could see any of this. I'm gonna switch it over. Yeah, I've just been sort of crazy sketching.
Cool.
Sweet.
This one came out good. This is just a crazy man. But yeah, I mean, this is in many ways, I set this up long ago and did a couple, and for various reasons, dropped out of doing it and brought it back recently, and eventually figured out how hangouts are done nowadays, and decided to do it weekly along with the Artcast's hangout. And it's really, I think it's benefits anybody who's a part of it, and anybody can watch all their episodes. I will say we should probably close this one out.
Oh yeah, we went way over the initial time.
Yeah, it's like 2 hours and 40 minutes so far. But man, Clayton, it's been awesome talking with you.
Yeah, I like it. Be quiet, but I'm just soaking it in. It's been nice.
No, that's awesome. It's awesome that you can join us, and you did speak up in the beginning, so it's great having you here. But definitely come to a future one and feel free to jump in and talk. And one of the great things I like about just people in the comic industry or just artists in general is that it's not necessary. You don't have to have years of experience to just tell me about your perspective of things, because everybody's point is valid, and there's information I learn from everyone. But yeah, it's definitely great, and I love seeing your board and your setup there. That's definitely inspirational. I should do something like that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Just the idea of working standing up is cool. I mean, 'cause that's the other problem is the health issues of being an artist. You know, just being at a table all the time, sitting down.
Yeah.
It's like you start, having that sedentary lifestyle. Actually standing up and moving while you're working on comp pages. I've been thinking about like, I don't want to give up the drawing table, but if I can find a nice way that I can transform it, so I can work standing up for an hour, then sit for an hour, stand up for an hour, sit for an hour, I'd kind of like that.
Yeah, like ever since I started painting and I had my easel high enough where I could stand up, I was like, man, why haven't I done this in the past? Like, my work has so much more energy to it when I'm standing up. I don't know why, but I don't know. It feels way better for me. I sit down a ton though, especially with my sketchbook. But whenever I get the chance, I like standing up. It's a nice change.
I did some live art not too long ago, and it's done on, basically we set up boards and slap some paper on the boards. So it's completely vertical. For me, it's total adjustment. I usually like, I could work on a kitchen table. I like working on a flat surface. It doesn't have to be all. I don't have a problem working that way. It's, some people it's a perspective thing, but I see things really good anyway. But working vertical, it's challenging. Like, how do I work my arm, and how do I not screw up the drawing? I did pretty decent so far, but I know I can be so much better once I just essentially do it a bunch of times, because it is a little different for me, and it's challenging for that alone. But,
Yeah, and a lot of times it's just nice to get, like, I don't know, in a different mindset.
Yeah.
Because when I'm sitting with my sketchbook so much, I don't know, I almost get lazy. Sometimes I'll be like laying on the couch, and I'm like, man, I need to jump up and do something different. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and Jeremy.
Yeah.
Always good to talk to you.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, all the times we interacted online, I think this was the longest conversation we had. So it was like nice to chop it up. So we've always had pleasant exchanges online, so it was good to sit and have a long conversation.
Yeah, it was awesome, man. I know you're a guy who has a lot to say, and I definitely recommend anybody who doesn't know you or your work to check out your series of videos, which basically is you throw topics out for each one, but you have a lot to say, and a lot of creative inspiration throughout your videos. So
I really appreciate that, man. That means a lot. Thank you.
My pleasure, man, and awesome having you on, and I can't believe how much we talked today.
Well, that's the sign of a good conversation. You look up and the time has just gone by.
Yeah. So. Well, definitely, if anyone still watching us and still listening, share this with your friends. It's the whole idea. It's like, if I listen to podcasts while I work. If I'm not talking with people through Hangouts or on Skype, I listen to podcasts. I watch videos. I play music, although that's a rarity. I should get more into that again. And yeah, this is Studio Synergy is created for that function. It's like, it's like your little friend going on in the background while you're crafting your own comics or illustrations or paintings or whatever.
Oh yeah, it's it's that old feeling, the studio with artists, just kind of chopping it up. Like I was in a jag of listening to a bunch of interviews. Will Eisner had a book called Shop Talk that Dark Horse put out years ago, and I recently got a DVD documentary, and the bonus feature on the Eisner documentary is all of the audio recordings. So imagine sitting and listening to a podcast of Will Eisner talking to Gil Kane, Kirby, Simon. There's another artist they were talking to that knew Lou Fine, Jack Davis, like all of these classic artists. You're just listening to them talking about the business, the storytelling process, things just about how their lives in society and the publishing industry in those days. And in a way, I feel like you're kind of carrying on that tradition because you're just bringing, a lot of contemporary, indie creators together to just talk about what we're doing in our daily lives and how our lives are affecting the art that we're making and how we're making it. And this feels like it's in the vein of those kind of conversations.
Cool, man. It's definitely a compliment. And I mean, you mentioned Gil Kane. I love Gil Kane. I love his work. I don't think I'll ever be that type of like how tight he is with anatomy and everything. But he is always and always will be an inspiration. I mean, Frank Miller was inspired by Gil Kane. How much of his work looks like that?
Yeah, you don't see it in the work, but you see it in the structure, but you don't necessarily see it in the work.
Yeah. Wow, that sounds really awesome. I gotta eventually get a copy of that myself. Well, cool. Yeah, so I guess we'll close this one out. Thanks very much for coming on, and tell your friends you were on the episode, and we'll do this again next week. I might try to do it on a weeknight because I know at least one of my friends can't make it on the weekend. So I try to mix it up and see try to get other people involved.
Well, I definitely plan to pop in on more of them. I may not make it to everyone, but I enjoyed being here and hanging out with you guys, and I appreciate you inviting me. So it's been fun. I look forward to more of them.
Oh, my pleasure. I got the Artcasters at midnight tonight, which is the group is full of YouTube artists who create art, but it's also just artists in general, and I do a hangout with them. You're in the group now, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, I am, and I was actually trying to decide whether I wanted to try and get in on the early one or the late one, and I just figured I don't know what my schedule's going to be for the rest of the day, so if I was going to sit down and work, why not hop in now? That way I could at least kind of participate in one, because I didn't want to be one of those guys who just shows up once and then you never see again. I figure as long as as long as I make an occasional pop-up, it's like, all right, I still feel like I'm part of the community and I'm participating, and that's the hardest thing, is having a group of people that, it's one thing to get people to show up for something cool once. It's another thing to really build a community, and I feel like that's what you're doing. So.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely trying to. It's episode by episode. But yeah, okay. So goodbye, everybody. See you again next time.
All right. Thanks a lot. It's nice meeting you, Clayton.
Oh, you too, Jeremy. You have a good one, huh?
All right. Take care, man.